Thank you. Good evening. Good evening. How's everyone?
Good evening. Hi.
I want to thank Andrew, who has really just done an awesome job at these Borough Board meetings. And I want to thank all of you who come out and just give your input. On the agenda tonight, we have a public hearing regarding the Department of City Planning's proposed zoning text amendment on mandatory inclusionary housing and zoning for quality and affordability. We also have a public hearing regarding the Department of City Planning's proposed zoning text amendment on zoning the quality and affordability. The third item is a presentation by Waterfront Alliance on Waterfront Edge Design Guidelines. And the fourth item is introduction of proposed resolutions. We're happy to see our Councilman, Jamani Williams, who is doing an awesome job around gun safety. And I think he's going to roll out some stuff in the next couple of months of how he's going to bring all the agencies together. He has been talking about this for a long time. And how do we bring all of the agencies together to treat gun violence in a holistic approach. So we're looking forward to that, and really thank you for what you have been doing around gun safety. Andrew's going to call a roll call.
Okay. Community Board 1, Community Board 2, Community Board 3, Community Board 4, Community Board 5, Community Board 6, Community Board 7,
Here.
Community Board 8,
Here.
Community Board 9, Community Board 10, Community Board 11,
Here.
Community Board 12, Community Board 13,
Here.
Community Board 14,
Here.
Community Board 15, Community Board 16, Community Board 17, Community Board 18. Councilmember Barron's office, Councilmember Cornegie's office, Councilmember Cumbo's office, Councilmember Deutsch's office, Councilmember Espinal's office, Councilmember Eugene's office, Councilmember Gentili's office, Councilmember Greenfield's office, Councilmember Lander's office, Councilmember Levin's office, Councilmember Mizell's office, Councilmember Mealy's office, Councilmember Menchaca's office, Councilmember Reynoso's office, Councilmember Traeger's office, Councilmember Williams.
Just a few quick announcements. We're going to be giving out free flu shots at Borough Hall on November 6th and Thursday, November 19th from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Here at Borough Hall. So if you know anyone that need a free flu shot, please have them come out. I took mine already. And, this is supposed to be a very tough flu season. On Monday, November 9th, from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., Borough Hall is going to be hosting a resource and recruitment fair for veterans and those looking to start a career in the armed forces as well. And also tomorrow, November 5th, from 6 to 8 p.m., we will be holding here at Borough Hall a youth organization capacity building forum, so teaching our young people how to learn about writing a business plan, grant writing, technology, social media, and other tools that will help organizations reach and service Brooklyn's youth. And we're really focusing on our Brooklyn youth. We announced earlier this week our Code Brooklyn, where we're asking all of our schools to have an hour of code. Over 400 schools here in the borough of Brooklyn. We have a 50% sign-up rate thus far. We are competing with, hopefully, with Chicago, who has a similar school size, where we want to sign up as many schools as possible. We want a 100% rate and really introduce coding to our young people and the job capacity that comes with coding. We are going to hold off on the meeting of the minutes until we get a quorum. I'm pretty sure people will be trickling in as the evening goes on. And Jamani, is there anything you want to add that's going on to your office? Okay. All right. So our first agenda item is the proposed zoning text amendment for mandatory inclusionary housing created by the Department of City Planning in consultation with the Department of Housing, Preservation, and Development. This text amendment is a key component in Mayor de Blasio Housing New York plan to create or preserve 200,000 affordable housing units. Utilizing the mandatory inclusionary housing program, for the first time, New York City would mandate the inclusion and performance of affordable housing in residential developments over 10 units. Built within the individually rezoned areas, the requirement would operate together with city housing subsidies, other zoning changes, and 421A reforms achieved in Albany in June 2015. You may recall that City Planning presented this proposal to the Borough Board on October 6th. Howard Slacken, Director of Strategic Planning from the Department of City Planning, is here tonight. I'm sorry? Okay. As Andrew just shared with me, Howard will do a presentation. He's going to ask questions later on? Answer questions later on?
yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to turn it over to Howard. We're going to do the questions first? Why don't you, since you know exactly what you're doing, why don't you tell me?
So what we're going to do is we're going to start the public hearing now, because the members of the public are here, and then City Planning is able to do a short presentation afterwards that will address some of the questions and concerns raised during the public hearing process. That's probably the most efficient way to go about this. So at this time, we'd like to open up the floor to questions or comments from any members of the Borough Board or their representatives on the proposal for mandatory inclusionary housing. Councilmember Williams.
You're doing one at a time, right?
Yep. So this is just mandatory inclusionary.
Thank you. Who's going to answer the question? Who's answering the question?
Mr. Slack.
So thank you very much. My concern with the MIH still is some of the options that are there. For those who know, there are 3 options. The third option is still really problematic to me, which is the option that is 120% of AMI. I always believe that we must have mixed incomes in most projects that we do, so that we can break up the pockets of poverty. So I am for making sure that we have middle income and even some of the higher income. But that particular option could be just only 120% AMI, which could be close to market rate, and so there may not be any affordability in that one. And the second option worries me, because you could just have 80% and not go lower, and I'm concerned as well. The first one I think is decent, but I would like, if there was a way to ensure that all of the options at least had some 40% AMI in it. Sorry. Because it's problematic. We really need to drive down a little deeper. And I'm still looking for some more information on the opt-out, which I understand is for the smaller. I understand the smaller sites might be a little bit more difficult, but I still would like more information.
If this is all right. Thank you, Councilmember, for the questions. First of all, I just want to also introduce Anas Latinsky, our Deputy Director of our Brooklyn Borough Planning Office, who's also here tonight, and we can try and answer as many questions as we can. I think the first thing I want to say is that I think you've registered a few concerns, and I think I will say that we hear them, and I'm not sure that I'll be able to I can explain what's in the proposal and the extent to which I can answer questions about what's in the proposal, but we are definitely mindful of, I think, the concerns you've raised. For instance, the 120% AMI option, what we've, I think, been referring to as the workforce option, but this is an option that is an attempt to respond to some of the issues that we found in our financial feasibility assessment, which we did for the proposal, which showed that in some market conditions where the market can produce housing without subsidy, but not at much above that level. In other words, the market rate housing is at about, a little bit over 120% and not much higher of area median, that it's impossible to subsidize the deeper affordability in those without public subsidy. And so the proposal would always require that the workforce option be coupled with one of the other options, what we're calling option 1 and option 2, which do target lower incomes down to 60% on average of AMI, or 80% average of AMI. The other point you raised about ensuring that we can reach lower incomes within the program as well is I think a point that we want to take back with us as well. What we've proposed thus far is requirements at an average of 60% and an average of 80% of AMI, and exactly how you achieve that average may vary, but we're going to be looking at that more closely, I think, in the process, because the idea that we were trying to accommodate is that you can target some units at lower incomes while also targeting some units at higher incomes, and on average you would end up at 60% or 80% of AMI, which I think sounds like it's more of the kind of spread that you're looking to accomplish, rather than having everything at exactly 80% of AMI. So that's an issue that we're going to be looking at more closely as well.
Well, thank you.
You mentioned the in lieu fee option, which I didn't respond to. Thank you for reminding me. The proposal includes an option for developments that are smaller than 25, that don't exceed 25 units, to make a payment into a fund that would be reserved for local affordable, to support affordable housing within that particular community. The purpose of this is to acknowledge that for smaller developers, for the city, and for the nonprofit administering agents that oversee the affordable units under the inclusionary housing program, back up for a second, which is that every affordable housing unit provided under the inclusionary housing program has a nonprofit administering agent assigned to it who is responsible for monitoring the leasing and releasing of units to make sure that they're going to qualifying families, to qualifying households, so that people who income qualify get the units when they turn over. Administering 2 or 3 units here and 2 or 3 units there is something that we understand is sometimes possible, but is more of a challenge for the administering agents, because it's very difficult for them to keep track of all these scattered units. So the idea of the in lieu option is to create an alternative where a payment could be made into a fund instead of providing a small number of affordable units within a development. And that fund would be in keeping with the purposes of the stated purpose of the inclusionary housing program, which is to encourage neighborhood economic diversity, would be reserved for use in the neighborhood. And it could be used, because the payments into the fund would vary in size. It could be used for things like preservation, new construction, assisting with site acquisition to achieve affordable housing purposes within the neighborhood. The specific structure for how the fees will be set is something we're still working on, and HPD is really leading on that, and we're working with them. But the purpose of the fee is not to be an easy way out, but to be a practical, workable alternative where the fee is going to enable the city to provide an affordable unit. Not that it's sort of a discounted, workaround, but that this is going to enable the city to provide affordable housing in keeping with the purpose of the program.
Well, thank you. I think that option 1 would, practically speaking, get us to some 40% of AMI. I think option 2, practically speaking, may not. We may just end up with 80% of AMI. So that really concerns me. I'm not sure how you force couple the 120% with the other options, but I'd like to hear more about that and more about the specifics of the in lieu. The way it is now, if nothing changes, I wouldn't be supporting the MIH, and I would encourage others not to, unless we make some more tinkering there to try to make sure that we really do have a good spread.
I appreciate the comment. Let me just describe the process by which options will be selected, just to make sure that that's clear as well. This is all setting up a program which is going to then be implemented in individual areas as future zoning actions happen. And all those zoning actions individually go through the ULURP process. And so they will come to the community board, they'll go to the borough president's office, and they'll also go to then the city planning commission and the city council, as every ULURP item does. And in that process, there will be, recommendations solicited from everyone in the ULURP process, and the planning commission and then the city council will vote to apply either, and I'll see if I can describe this concisely, either option 1, option 2, options 1 or 2, or any of those 3 choices with the workforce option added as an additional alternative. The workforce option will only be applied in those situations where the council has to approve this. If the local council member and if the city council is not supportive of that option being an appropriate option within the neighborhood, then it is not going to get applied through the process. The same thing goes for the other options. So, it may be appropriate in some areas to have option 1 or 2 available. It may make sense in some areas to say that, reaching the lowest incomes is a priority, and so option 1 should be the option that is coupled with the program. And that will be something that goes through that will be a decision-making process that accrues through ULURP each time.
Thank you. And this will be my last comment, but thank you very much for that. My concern, I think the options are good, but my concern, without some basic framework where you have to choose some of the lower income, that the low income units will stay in the neighborhoods that they currently are, and we will not break up the pockets of poverty, because it'll be left up to the council member, and some council members will just not want to choose that option. So that's what my concern is. But thank you very much for the responses.
Any other members of the Borough Board have questions this time?
Alvin Burke, Board 14. I just want to pick up on something Jemani alluded to and you, Howard, responded to.
What am I closer to you?
Certainly, sir. I wasn't sure I wanted everyone to hear what I had to say. Has there been a decision made on how the fund would be administered? That's one question. And are you asserting that during the community board's participation in ULURP, either through a special permit or through a rezoning, the question of the options would be fair for the community board to consider?
I'll take the second part first. The answer is yes. It actually will be the way that this program would work. The option or options that apply within a mandatory inclusionary housing area would be part of the subject of the land use applications that's before the community board, and so it will be there for their comment and feedback in the ULURP process.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I have the world's shortest memory tonight. What was the first part of your question?
The question about the administration of the fund.
We are working on details on that, but the idea is HPD would administer the fund, the Affordable Housing Fund, and they would remain earmarked within individual communities.
Thank you.
Been joined by Councilwoman Barron. Councilmember?
Good evening, thank you. Councilmember Barron, Community District 5, Community Board 5. Question about the MIH. Isn't it true that for those developments that have from 10 to 25 units, that they can opt out, or they can apply to the Board of Standards and Appeal to have that number reduced, either in terms of providing affordable units or the amount that would normally go into the fund?
There are two different provisions, I think, here. One is what I was just describing to Councilmember, in response to Councilmember Williams' question, which is the in lieu payment option, which would apply to developments that are 25 units or smaller, so essentially 11 to 25 units. And that would be the option to make a payment into the locally dedicated fund instead of providing the actual units to satisfy the requirement. The other process that you're alluding to is that there would be, in much the same way as for all zoning provisions, there has to be a variance process at the Board of Standards and Appeals so that a property owner can appeal if they are faced with a financial hardship. That is what makes zoning legal for us to do. Similarly, we have to have a process at the Board of Standards and Appeals by which someone can say the mandatory inclusionary housing requirement, not some other factor, but the specific mandatory inclusionary housing requirement is what is making it impossible for me to achieve a reasonable return. And so the purpose of what we've created, and we've created a process, a BSA special permit process in the zoning, and the purpose of that is to be a very narrow process by which there can be a hardship-based appeal.
Oh, okay.
So that's the answer.
The second part of my question then, as I've been told, option 1 is the one that will apply to the East New York area housing plan, not option 2.
That's what's been proposed in East New York.
And then, so developments with 11 to 25 units don't have to have a percent set aside. It's two different formulas that you're using. One is for units that are 10 and under,
So,
or less than 10, you don't have to participate
right,
at all.
exactly. Developments of 10 units or fewer are exempt from the requirement. Developments between 11 and 25 either must satisfy the requirement or make the payment into the locally dedicated fund. Developments larger than 25 units would all have to meet the requirements of option 1.
Okay. Okay. And then the second part of the question is, the mandatory inclusionary housing proposal says that 25% of the residential floor area would be for an average of 60% of the AMI, which is $50,000, up to $109,200.
I'm sorry, it would be for an average of 60% of AMI.
Right, and that can go up according to what's on page 16.
Right. So
yes.
yeah, let me. So the idea is that if you go lower, if you go to much lower incomes, then some of the units could go higher. But if you don't go lower, then you couldn't provide any of the units at those higher incomes. The idea is that no unit under the proposed mandatory inclusionary housing program, no unit could be considered an inclusionary housing unit if it exceeds 130% of AMI, but you always have to
Which is
satisfy the average.
$109,000.
I think that's correct, yes.
Yes.
But the idea is if you're providing 25% of the units at an average of 60% of AMI, I am not quick enough to do the math in my head, but if you were to try to go up to that high in income level, we can crunch some numbers, but you would have to do the remainder of the units at very, very low incomes. That's what the averaging provision results in.
Thank you.
Councilmember, I would just add one other comment to that, which is
Yes.
that the program that's proposed here is designed to work in a very wide variety of locations and circumstances, and really represents the minimum that can be done for developing new housing in areas where this program is established. And it's always possible for an individual development to exceed the requirement to either provide more units of affordable housing or to provide them at lower incomes than the minimum that the program stipulates.
Okay, then that brings me to another question that I have. I think it's 15% of the residential floor area has to be designated, is that right?
So it has to be designated, the idea is 25, under option on 25% of the residential floor area would be required to be affordable to households at an average of 60% of AMI.
Okay, thank you.
Do other members of the Borough Board?
But
Oh, sorry.
I still want to get clarity. Isn't there a 15% area requirement? On page 16, at least 15% of the residential floor area for households at $34,000. Isn't that a part of the MIH as well? And my question really gets to, you're designating a percentage of the floor area, but you're not designating the number of units.
Right, so let me take those pieces separately. I'm not sure what page 16 is, but there's not a specific 15% at a different income level in our proposal. I think that actually sounds like the ELA program, which is what HPD is going to be using to subsidize most housing in East New York. The ELA program term sheet, which is an HPD extremely low and low income affordability program, I believe that's the lowest band in that program. And so if you are, back to what Anna was saying, if you are coupling an HPD subsidy program with the inclusionary housing requirement, you will achieve deeper or broader affordability as the HPD programs work. I am doing it again. I really apologize. The other part of your question just now, I need to take notes when people ask questions.
Talked about the number of units.
Yes,
We're not
thank you.
understanding how many units. So
That's right.
whereas it may be 15% of the residential floor area, we don't know how many units that will generate.
That's correct. The zoning requirement is set forth in terms of residential floor area, which is how the zoning generally measures things. What that means is that the units, if we were to have a requirement that said a percentage of units, it might create an incentive to try to game the system by providing a lot of very small affordable units, right, and provide less affordable housing by shrinking the affordable units and saying, well, we're providing 30 affordable units, they're just 30 very small affordable units. So instead, we say that the amount of housing, whatever the unit size, has to be proportional to the amount of overall housing. And that avoids that kind of potential negative outcome. There are other provisions in the program that do speak to bedroom mix of the units, and so in a mixed income building, the affordable units have to have at least the same bedroom mix as the market rate units. So if there were a mixed income development that had, for instance, 1-bedrooms and 2-bedroom apartments, you couldn't build a bunch of affordable studios in that building. You have to match that. In addition, there's you either have to match the bedroom mix, or 50% of the affordable units are 2 bedrooms and another 25% are 1 bedrooms at minimum. So there are different ways to ensure that there's a healthy mix of affordable.
And finally, is it true that the provision for affordable units can be on-site or off-site or at another location within a half-mile away?
That's correct. The proposal, which is structured in many ways like the existing inclusionary housing program with some specific changes, allows for 3 different location options. The affordable units, if they're provided in the same building, have to be mixed with the market rate units with a common entrance to both market rate and affordable units to avoid some of the concerns that have arisen in previous developments. As with the existing inclusionary housing program, there is an option to provide the units at another location within the same community board or within a half mile. Now that is an option that in the current program has been used infrequently, and that is largely...
Is there a requirement that the amenities be exactly the same in both buildings?
There are no requirements about building, we don't have any requirements in zoning about building amenities.
That's problematic.
In the other, one of the reasons why this option has not been used frequently in the current program is that there is no tax benefit available to a market rate development that is not in the same location as the affordable units. The 421A program, if someone is seeking a tax exemption under the 421A tax exemption program, they have to be in the same location in order to receive a tax exemption. So that is not something that can be realized in that. And so that's one of the main reasons why we haven't seen it. Another reason is that there are very stringent requirements for the timing of when affordable units are delivered. They have to be essentially delivered before or at the exact same time as, not a minute later than, the market rate units. And that can make it, there are upsides and downsides, but that makes it challenging to sometimes time, to manage the timing of 2 different developments, and for that reason we've seen, I think, limited utilization of the off-site option.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other members of the Borough Board have any questions at this time? Alvin?
Just want to pick up on something you just said, Mr. Slatkin. The 421A can't be used off-site, has to be part of the market development.
Yes, that's a provision of the state legislation.
Are you
on
seeking
the
to have
tax
that
exemptions.
changed in order to enable this option to be used in MIH?
No, we are not. And we are seeking, there was many of you may be aware that there was a lot of effort that went into the legislative discussion last year at the state. There were changes made to the 421A program by the state legislature that reflected many, not all, of the city's recommendations and proposals. But there is, there are no proposals to change that provision of 421A at present.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Councilmember?
Sorry, I just wanted to follow up on one thing. So the, you said 10 and below would be exempt. Does that count per project, per developer? I mean,
That would be per, actually the way we're describing it would be essentially per zoning lot. Because we wanted, we know that there are ways that people might try to circumvent the requirement. So you can't take an existing large lot, break it up into 5 smaller buildings, each of which would waive out of the requirement. The idea is that if you have a lot that exists, if the zoning goes into effect and there's a lot there, you can't you can only build up to 10 units on that lot, no matter how large the lot is. If you want to go beyond 10 units, you're subject to the requirements of the program, even if you break it into multiple buildings. So it would apply
What if it's a developer that has 5 different lots?
in different locations, then they would be individually subject to the zoning. The zoning can only look at the property and can't look at the who owns the property. It's not,
I'm a little concerned about that.
okay.
Ms. Granville?
I appreciate the council member's comment about the 120% AMI, and I'm a little troubled by the fact that it's a federal number, and for each individual community board, that number may or may not be meaningful, because when they say federal AMI, they're including area outside of New York City. So it's a shame in this process that we couldn't do something to have a number that's a little more meaningful to work with.
I appreciate the comment. It's something we definitely hear from communities around the city. No two communities have the same income levels in the neighborhood, and the AMI levels are indeed set by HUD. For that reason, what we're trying to do is target lower percentages of that AMI wherever possible.
Councilmember Gentili?
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I have a large senior development in my district that has a relatively large parking lot, and a parking lot that is used frequently by the seniors who live in the development. Under this proposal, where you would have reduced and limited parking requirements.
Councilmember, that's for the following.
Oh, that's,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
So we're just doing the mandatory inclusionary right now.
Oh, I
and
see,
we-
I'm
We
sorry.
broke them up that way.
Okay, then I'll come back with that. I'm
Are
sorry.
there any other additional questions on the mandatory inclusionary proposal from members of the Borough Board? Okay. At this point, we want to open up our public hearing on this matter. Speakers who want to speak in the public hearing need to fill out a speaker's card available at the front table, and we're going to take everyone in order of signing up. Before we do that, just want to acknowledge that we have Community Board 1 present who joined after the roll call, Community Board 3, Community Board 6, Community Board 9, Councilmember Barron, Councilmember Cornegie's office, Councilmember Gentili. So I need you to fill out a card as well for.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Well, I just wanted to say, just for our information purpose, straight talk, this is bogus. It's a sham. It's not going to bring real affordability to our area. We have out in East New York 6,300 units that they're proposing. They start off with 50% of them being market before we get to anything affordable. And then when they start talking about affordability, it's with the other 50%. And when they bring in the mandatory inclusionary housing deal, there's so many options for developers. They don't have to use this, and they know that. What they're going to do is most of them will plead hardship and go to the Board of Standard and Appeals and get out of it. Or if they, of the 6,300 units, if they decide to do everything at 10 stories and below, they don't have to do that. That's low, 25% affordability. It's almost similar to the 421A plan, the 80-20. They're still trying to get to 80-20, 80% market, and then the mayor always talks about middle class. Let's be real, this is gentrification. They're talking about bringing more whites into neighborhoods that whites fled from and left for blacks and Latinos. And then when we finally get it together, we're fixing up the neighborhoods and renovating the parks and getting some affordable housing, then all of a sudden now everybody's interested in little old East New York and other areas like that. I want to encourage you that this should not happen, because if this is a precedence that's going to be set across the city, you're talking about a permanent housing in perpetuity, for permanency. And even if you go to 60% of the AMI, that's like $46,000. The AMI of East New York is $34,000. The AMI in other areas is way even below the 60% mark. And then they have the option, if they want to do 30%, well, they took it out of our plan, but in other plans, they can do 80% of the AMI, which is $62,000 for a family of 4. This is not affordability. This is not the spirit in which we should be going forward with, and certainly not the policy in which we should be going forward with. If you're going to be honest, for real, about affordability in a town that has communities that have such low area median incomes. Some third world nations don't have these kind of low incomes that we have in the South Bronx, $19,000 and $20,000, $20 some odd thousand for a family of 4. You bring this in, and then you're talking about no affordability in the South Bronx, no affordability in East New York, and look what they did to Bedford-Stuyvesant already. Bedford-Stuyvesant is tremendously gentrified, and Crown Heights is about to be gentrified. So we have to stop this and let them quote all this double talk. They have option this, option that. There's too many options. We should make it clear. You want permanent affordability? Make it 50%. And make it high enough for the neighborhood AMI, not a citywide AMI that's almost twice as high as a neighborhood AMI. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
The first speaker, is that Enid Braun? Yes, Enid Braun, please come up. For all our speakers, 3 minutes. We're asking you to do 3 minutes to comment on, okay, Enid?
I'm going to try.
We know you can do it. I believe in you.
MIH, ZQA together mix apples and oranges in terms of goals and potential impact, worsened by one-size-fits-all proposed zoning text changes across the city. Zoning is framed as a tool to address subpar building design and the need for more affordable housing, but the unstated assumption is that government must entice the real estate sector with even greater profits to achieve a public good. This method has been tested over the last 2 decades, producing little public benefit but plenty for developers. Given tremendous private sector real estate development, why doesn't the city just demand more in the way of affordable housing under existing allowable limits? ZQA presents height limit increases and bonuses as remedies for bad design, much of which was produced through previous upzonings. But history shows that bad design is simply an outcome of developers' tendency to build as cheaply as possible to the limits of allowable height and bulk to maximize profits. Zoning creates been tested over the last 2 decades, producing little public benefit but plenty for developers. Given tremendous private sector real estate development, why doesn't the city just demand more in the way of affordable housing under existing allowable limits? ZQA presents height limit increases and bonuses as remedies for bad design, much of which was produced through previous upzonings. But history shows that bad design is simply an outcome of developers' tendency to build as cheaply as possible to the limits of allowable height and bulk to maximize profits. Zoning creates design constraints, but cannot force good design or ensure what is built is best for a neighborhood. Regarding contextual zone increases, there's this inexplicable idea that a 13-foot mandatory first floor ceiling height is going to fix design. The presentation I saw, DCP praised brownstone blocks with 4-foot green spaces in front. And all they're going to achieve by raising the height 5 feet on blocks that mostly have buildings 38 feet or below is just make taller buildings less contextual and not better designed. And this problem is even worse for blocks without historic protections. My block has 5 concurrent construction sites, 2 where small row houses were a year ago. I'm getting calls and letters to buy my property all the time. DCP states there are no incentives for teardowns, but the fact that they raised this issue reveals the truth. Upzonings that support market trends raise land values, which incentivizes demolition and speculative development. Oh, am I done already? Can I read my very last paragraph? Because I actually address the fact that areas like East New York are being targeted because it's an area that just the previous administration didn't get to yet. And my last paragraph says, does the city need new residential development if it isn't affordable housing? We don't have a problem of developer interest, but we do have a lack of affordable housing. So if it isn't affordable, then let developers build within livable zoning limits. When New Yorkers embrace the concept of neighborhood character, it is this livability they want to preserve.
Thank you very much.
This public hearing is for mandatory inclusionary housing proposal only. We'll address the zoning quality and affordability in the next public hearing following this meeting.
Lucy Cote. And after Lucy is Ed Jaworski.
Hi, good evening. I'm going to read fast. These are my impressions. We hear a lot about adding 20 to 30% affordable housing units, but nothing about the much more critical effect of adding 50% as in East New York, or 70 to 80% market rate housing to communities that are composed largely of low and moderate income families. What happens when you have a sudden influx of multiple projects that inject high-end housing units to an area? You have a recipe for instant gentrification and a recipe for harassment of rent-regulated tenants to push them out of what is now an upwardly spiraling rent district. At the same time, there's the harassment of low-income homeowners to sell their properties to speculators. The plan is supposed to preserve affordable housing, but how can it when we know that real estate speculators are buying up the low-income housing before the plan goes into effect? What happens on the street to longtime merchants when landlords realize they have a new, more affluent resident population in the area? There's no protection for them. As we have seen throughout many districts in the city, store rents double, triple, and more, and well-established businesses have to fold up and leave, making room for posher, trendier businesses, often national chains, box stores, or bars. Often we see storefronts remain empty for months or years as landlords wait to fill their store with high-end merchants. This leads to the destruction of neighborhood character and towards a homogeneous city. The constant talk of the 20 to 30% affordable housing strikes me as a diversionary tactic to distract the public from looking at what is really going on, bringing in a great majority of subsidized market rate housing. As for the affordable income housing bans, none of them address the desperate need of low-income people and the ever-increasing homeless population. There will be a few units at the lowest band at 40% AMI, which represents an income of approximately $31,000. There will be more units in the middle bands of 60 and 80% AMI, which represents incomes of approximately $46,000 to $62,000. But these will represent a handful of units in what will overwhelmingly be market or luxury units, and again does not address the lowest income numbers of New York. Absurdly, affordable housing includes 120% AMI, which represents an income of over $93,000. Our taxes would be subsidizing someone who can afford market rate housing. How is that a good plan? In an area like East New York, where 35% of the people are listed as below 30% of AMI, having incomes between $0 and $23,000, the proposal is to have new development of 50% affordable and 50% market rate units built. But the affordability bands do not correspond with the current AMI of East New York residents. So even those units called affordable will add to the gentrification. Ordinary people are subsidizing developers. Developers do not pay into new infrastructure to support their new buildings, and because of 421A, they pay no taxes. So who pays to develop the infrastructure that benefits these developers? The taxes of ordinary people go up and serve as a subsidy for the developers who profit with millions of dollars. This is an upward distribution of wealth from the poor and middle class. I have a little bit more. Can I go on? A paragraph. Well, I'll skip that one. Another big concern is enforcement, that units stay affordable forever, as promised. New York City has done a very poor job of enforcement up to now. There's no end of stories of how tenants have been mercilessly harassed to leave their apartments to make way for more affluent high-end apartment units in desirable neighborhoods. A thoroughly mapped-out enforcement plan with real teeth must be part of any affordable housing plan, or in a few years, when the attention is off an area, landlords will start pushing those out of the so-called protected units. If there's any consequence to this, it will most likely be a small fine. The real estate industry is very focused and organized, and it will find...
Lucy,
I'm finished.
Lucy, that's it. That was the last paragraph.
This is the last sentence.
No, that was the last paragraph. Okay.
This is
You got to respect the time.
I know.
Lucy,
I'm
Lucy,
finished.
thank you. Ed? Thank you for your commentary.
Good evening, Ed Jaworski, President, Madison Marine Homecrest Civic Association. Now, we should stick to MIH in these comments? Okay. I don't have prepared comments, so I'll shut up whenever the bell rings. A couple of questions, though, regarding the size of these developments. You talked in terms of 25 units and less, and Councilman Williams talked about, questioned about 10 units and less. The problem is, I wonder how big you're talking about making these buildings, 20-story buildings, 50-story buildings, or whatever. Because there are some attractive buildings, and I would suspect, I don't live in East New York, but you drive down Atlantic Avenue, there are a couple of blocks of attractive-looking buildings that are 2-3 stories high. I would suspect that people in that neighborhood would like something like this. This is what's going on in New Orleans, the rebuilding after Katrina. The project-looking buildings that were there came down, and they put up 2- and 3-story buildings with even porches in front. So I would suspect, again, it's just a suspicion, that people would be interested in something attractive to come back to on the block and take ownership in the block and be concerned about what's going on the block, crime, how the kids are doing, and so forth and so on, if they had attractive housing on that block. So I think this business about the size of the number of units is an interesting and probably important thing, and maybe there's got to be a formula down in the lower numbers of 25 units or less too, making sure that they're affordable. Previous speaker mentioned about enforcement, and also the city planning folks mentioned that they saw some concern keeping track and enforcing the smaller developments if they were spread all over the place. The fact is, I don't know if you're aware of this, there is almost $1 billion in outstanding DOB ECB fines. It's actually 700-some-odd million right now, and over 100 million has been taken off the books. So, you know, you're going to come up with new regulations, and you're going to say you can enforce them, or maybe you can't enforce them. So what's the bill going to be? It's going to be over $1 billion before we know it, as far as the MIH and this whole program goes. I'll have some other comments as we move into the other section. I do wonder, though, if you did consult, if city planning consulted with economists in putting this plan together, because we do know that speculation and profiteering has been going on for a long time. Not just a couple of months. It's probably been going on for 20 or 30 years, ever since East New York became a bombed-out area in the 1970s. I would suspect profiteering has been going on. Thank you.
Seeing that all members of the public have had the opportunity to speak on this matter, that concludes our public hearing on the mandatory inclusionary housing proposal. And that concludes our business related to the mandatory inclusionary housing zoning text amendment. We'll have city planning do a presentation after the following public hearing to address concerns raised in the public session on both of those proposals. The next agenda item is a proposed zoning text amendment for zoning for quality and affordability developed by the Department of City Planning. The zoning for quality and affordability text amendment aims to address zoning regulations that are outdated and often impede and discourage the production of better quality residential buildings and the creation of a wider range of new affordable housing. This proposal is tailored to address issues specific to different neighborhood contexts. You may recall that City Planning presented this proposal to the Borough Board on October 6th. Representatives from the Department of City Planning will be here to answer questions as well. So we'll begin at this time by opening up the floor to members of the Borough Board. Questions or comments from members of the Borough Board on the zoning for quality and affordability proposal. Councilmember Gentili?
I'll go back to my question of earlier time, and I'm just a little bit confused and want some clarity on the portion of the reduced and limited parking requirements and whether that applies to the senior housing and long-term care facilities. I have that in my district, and as I said, in one of the senior housing developments, there is a large parking lot. And I'm concerned that that space, which is usable and then used by seniors, may now be a space where development can take place.
So, thank you for the question, Councilmember. In the proposal, there's only one category of existing housing for which parking requirements would change, and it is essentially low-income senior housing. I think we should probably follow up with you about the specifics of the location, and so we can give you a more concrete answer about how the site would or wouldn't be affected by the proposal. I was going to say, the other thing is that this provision would only affect developments that are in what's designated as the transit zone under the proposal, and those are areas that have been identified that are close to transit and in neighborhoods that have lower levels of existing auto ownership and commutation. So if it's outside of that area, it would not be whatever requirements were in place at the time it was constructed would remain in effect.
Which is Councilmember Greenfield. But I believe the MIH leaves a lot to be desired still. I am fairly supportive of the ZQA. I believe many people, I know some of the community boards have voted it down. I think there's a lot of confusion about what's actually in the ZQA, what's in the MIH, what's in the rezonings in different neighborhoods. And so I think I don't know if it was the wisest for the city to do all of these at the same time, because I think it's providing a lot of confusion for some folks. But I know some of the angst from the ZQA has come from making sure that communities are contextual. I think this did a good job in doing that. From my understanding, and you can correct, 1- and 2-family home zoned areas would not be affected, and also, of course, some of the landmarked areas. Also, these are only, while the MIH is for those that are building up now, the ZQA is for those areas that have been rezoned downzoned in the past and would be in the future. And contextually speaking, I think if you have maybe 6 to 8 units, if I can't remember exactly, you may have an extra story or two if it's already zoned for that. And if you are maybe 10 to 15 stories, you may have an extra couple of stories if you're already zoned for that, which seems to make sense for me. I'm still trying to get clarity on the how many units or what percentage of units would be built on these extra stories for the extra units that they're getting allowed. And my understanding is it's hard to tell that because this is a blanket text change for the entire city. It seems to be more of a zoning tweak than an affordable housing program. So I don't know if there's any more clarity on what we think will be built in those areas and what the AMIs will be. In terms of the parking, I know that people are very confused. My understanding is if you're within half a mile of a train, then that's when the less parking, and it's not no parking, I believe it's less parking would accrue. I hadn't heard about the low-income areas, and so is that whether or not they live next to a transit? Because I would be concerned about that as well. I do know that we can't have everything for everybody everywhere, and so the push for housing over some of the parking areas, if we live near a train, makes some sense as long as there's some parking there. I do know people have to pay for the parking as well, so it's not free. I would also say, Councilmember Gentili, all of the senior advocacy groups have supported this plan when it comes to the senior housing, so you may want to reach out to them as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. I think probably the best way for us to respond to most of that is to defer response, and we can touch on a lot of those points as we run through an abbreviated. I want to be respectful of everybody's time tonight. We'll run through sort of an abbreviated version of the presentation and use it to touch on responses to some of those questions.
Councilmember Barron?
Yes, thank you. Regarding specifically the ZQA, from what I've read, it will eliminate off-street parking for low-income housing that's in the inclusionary housing zone. Is that correct?
What it would do is it would make parking for the affordable units under the inclusion, for new affordable units under the inclusionary housing program optional rather than mandatory.
There's that word optional again. Okay, I also understand, so that answer is yes, if they want to. I also understand that there's a reduction in the required parking so that it will enable mixed income development.
There would be, there is a provision that would allow, only by a special permit process, a mixed income development to reduce parking requirements for the non-affordable units if it were necessary to achieve the mixed income development. That would not be possible as of right, though, under the proposal.
And what I've read, there's no parking requirement for new senior housing, which gets to the council member's question.
And let me clarify all of the statements that I just made, which I think Richard has already caught me on, which are that these changes to the parking requirements would only apply within this particular geography that I've described, and we'll show some maps of it. And
the East New York plan.
East New York,
yes.
Not the East New York plan, but the East New York plan is included within that geography, but it's a geography that we're calling
This does not apply to the East New York plan, or it does apply?
It would apply to the
It does
East New York
apply.
plan. That's correct.
Okay.
Yes, and the idea is that for affordable housing for seniors, there would not be a parking requirement, and for other low-income housing, there would not be a parking requirement. But for moderate income and other housing under other types of programs, there would remain a requirement for parking.
And then there can be a reduction or elimination of parking on existing affordable senior housing, which also gets to the council member's question.
That's right. And that is the only, as I mentioned, the only category of existing building for which parking could be reduced. This is because we know that in many neighborhoods there are buildings that were built under the Federal 202 program that have little used parking lots out front. Actually, the Senior Housing Coalition, Live On, has put out their own assessment of their members' buildings, and what they've said is that, so we've heard from some of the senior housing operators that they want to create a sitting area and, tear up the pavement and just put landscaping and chairs for the residents, but they can't do it because the DOB says that's required parking and they can't eliminate it.
So is it restricted then to using that parking area for just sitting area?
It
No.
can be used for new development as well.
Exactly, and that's one of the reasons, contrary to what my colleague has said, one of the reasons that seniors that are in my community are opposed to this plan as well.
One of the things I'd like to note also is that the existing 202 housing that has been built, in order to build on those lots,
yes,
you've got to go back to HPD and to HUD to deal with the restrictions that have been placed on the property as part of the original development. And for that reason, we believe that these are going to what we have heard from the senior housing groups that are interested in using some of their parking lots is that they're trying to use them to serve the needs of seniors for affordable housing or for a related nursing care facility, for instance, but something that is driven by the same mission that the operators of the affordable housing have.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other members of the Borough Board? Question?
When you talk about affordable senior housing, is it permanent or 30 years?
The zoning today has a category for affordable senior housing that doesn't have any term on it whatsoever. Our proposal would establish a minimum term of 30 years for the affordable senior housing to qualify as that and earn what the zoning already sets forth in terms of higher FAR and what we're proposing under this proposal for additional height flexibility. That said, at the end of that 30-year period, HPD, and first of all, HPD's programs actually seek to get a 60-year period wherever they can. But at the end of that 30-year period, the city is working with the operators in order to extend affordability. And in the event that that were unsuccessful, that space, if it exceeds the floor area that's allowed for housing, or it exceeds the floor area the height that's allowed for ordinary housing, can't be used as ordinary market rate housing. It has to be used for something that's allowed by the zoning, which is going to generally be primarily the low-income senior housing. So that was not, I apologize, it wasn't a concise answer, but the idea is that the zoning has a hard requirement for a minimum of 30-year term, and that it is very likely to extend beyond that as well. I will say that if the affordable senior housing is produced under the inclusionary housing program, it is permanent.
Alvin?
Alvin Burke. I'd like to pick up on something that Councilmember Williams asked, or actually it was a comment of his that he said he was fairly supportive of zoning for quality and affordability, in part because it protects 1 and 2 family home districts. We have R3X zones in Community District 14, including one in Councilman Williams' district called South Midwood Residents Association. My understanding, and I'm asking you for clarity here, is that the protections extended to R1 and R2 districts do not apply for R3X with respect to long-term care facilities. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, the proposal would allow long-term care facilities in those lower density districts under the FARs that are essentially permitted for that use today under the zoning. There are community facility use that's permitted.
Would there
under
be any
zoning.
change to the FAR?
The FARs, I would like to check the chart and get back to you. I don't have, for R3X, there's no change. Okay, thank you. Richard is giving me notes on what I would have to look up right now.
Richard
But
is-
the idea is in the lower density districts, there are not changes in the floor area ratios, but the proposal would be limited to a change in the envelope that's available to long-term care facilities.
And just finally, the long-term care facilities, which are, that's the rubric that encompasses nursing homes under the new...
That's correct. That would be
proposal.
within that new category would be nursing homes.
That construction would be as of right, am I correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
And they could build to the proposed regulations as of right. There, I think, is an authorization to exceed that. That would remain in place, but not change.
And as of right construction is one of the categories of construction that's exempt from the city environmental quality review.
It is, at the time it is built. That's correct. We have done an environmental review of this proposal.
Okay.
for that
Thank you for
purpose.
clarifying that.
Thank you. One of the things I'd like to also just mention is that there are complexities to this, to the way this applies, and I think
Indeed
that
there are.
I think that we really want to readily acknowledge that and have made a great effort to try to provide as much information in as digestible a format as we can about this. And I do want to point people to the community district profiles that we've made available on our website, which some of the speakers here may have already referenced, but those are a way to see which provisions do and do not apply within a particular geography. Because I will say this, if the proposal were in fact one size fits all, it would be much simpler for me to explain. Unfortunately, there's a lot of detail in it, and we want to make sure that everyone is aware of that.
Well, just to give a shout out to your colleagues, Winston Von Engel and Jonah Rogoff, they have beaten our heads in with community district profiles. And
With love, I am
They've
sure.
been very forthcoming with information.
And we and if there are further questions from any of the boards, we do want to be able to answer them as well.
Any other members of the Borough Board have questions? Councilmember Williams?
Sure, thank you. And just so I'm clear, fairly supportive doesn't mean completely supportive, because I know there's still some complexity. But I didn't fully follow the exchange. So in South Midwood, what will change in terms of the nursing homes?
The only change in that geography would be the heightened setback regulations that apply to nursing homes or other long-term care facilities. So the only change would be the heightened setback limitations on those buildings.
How high can they go now?
For long-term care facilities. And also, I should say, we are changing the definition of these facilities to be long-term care facilities as opposed to the current definitions which refer to outdated state programs.
How much higher can they go?
They can go up to a total of 4 to 6 stories total.
And what was it now?
It varies. The R3X district, I'm going to be looking for, I believe it's going to be 3 stories, generally requires a pitched roof. And the issue with that for nursing care and senior housing is that we've been told by the developers of these facilities that they need to build elevator buildings to be accessible to the occupants of the building. They can't, the zoning envelope is modeled on a walk-up housing type, which is what you have in South Midwood.
So you can go from 3 stories to 6 stories, basically?
To between 4 to 6, that's correct. That's the proposal.
Any other questions from members of the Borough Board? Okay, great. Seeing no more questions from the Borough Board at this time, we're going to open up our public hearing on this matter. But before we do that, I just want to note for the record that we've been joined by Councilmember Cumbo's office as well. So speakers that want to speak on the zoning for quality and affordability, please fill out a speaker's card. I have a few here already that I'll call up one at a time. First is Sandy Balboza, I'm sorry. Followed by Ed Jaworski, and then Sandy Rayburn.
Sandy Balboza, President of the Atlantic Avenue Betterment Association. Communities throughout the city are opposed to this one-size-fits-all zoning proposal. Many communities, including Atlantic Avenue and Borum Hill, have worked for decades to create contextual zoning districts to protect neighborhoods from as-of-right overdevelopment and preserve its historic character. If the city's new zoning proposal is adopted, developers would be allowed to ignore contextual districts and build taller, bulkier buildings, undoing what so many worked to protect. A key goal in the zoning proposal is to encourage better quality buildings that contribute to the fabric of the neighborhood. However, there is nothing in the proposed zoning that mandates a developer to build quality buildings. And quality can mean different things to different developers. The zoning proposal does not consider the potential for direct residential and commercial displacement due to the new permitted floor area. On Atlantic Avenue in Borum Hill, upzoning in 2000, along with today's real estate market, has encouraged developers to tear down our 3- and 4-story buildings that have affordable residential units and affordable commercial spaces. The new 7- and 8-story buildings do not come with affordable rent. As a result, longtime residents and business owners are being forced out of the neighborhood. And finally, there does not seem to be a logical link between the goal of senior housing and the proposed zoning changes. You can build senior housing without upzoning. This zoning proposal is really about benefiting developers. Borough President Adams, who's not here right now, do not support this developer-driven zoning proposal. This plan is yet another giveaway to developers. Instead, call for a less biased public dialogue about how to fix our current zoning code. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Ed Jaworski, next.
Ed Jaworski, President, Madison Marine Homecrest Civic Association. Again, my comments are not prepared, but I'll do the best I can. One of the questions that I've raised with city planning representatives that have come to, I've attended 3-4 different community board member meetings. I went to a panel discussion at the Brooklyn Historical Society involving just East New York. I've spoken at a couple of gatherings in Queens. One of the questions that I've asked in each occasion is for city planning to define the expression character of a neighborhood. You look at all these proposals and the expression character of a neighborhood continually comes up. When Amanda Burden was chair of city planning, she walked around the city saying we've got to protect these blocks, the character of these blocks, the character of the neighborhood. And it's not defined. Well, finally, at Community Board 15 last week, I asked again, please define character of a neighborhood in this proposal, and was told, we'll look into defining it. First time anyone ever gave me a somewhat positive response to that. I have seen, in spending many days, many hours, and if you think in terms of airline pilots, they get graded based on how many hundreds of hours they spend in the air. I've spent hundreds of hours at the BSA, and I've seen the land use attorneys bully the BSA into accepting their definition of what the character of a neighborhood is, and it's become a one-dimensional definition. And I'm concerned that it's based on perfunctory conclusory statements which wouldn't be acceptable in a court of law, but because the BSA and community boards are not courts of law, people come in and say whatever they want, make up definitions, make up statements. It's, as I said, based on perfunctory conclusory statements. And I think it's very important that it be defined if we're going to talk about enhancing the character of neighborhood with this proposal and protecting the character of a neighborhood. It's got to be done. Also, I wonder what's happening to the Yards Text Amendment. Is that gone? Is that been flushed down the toilet? The Yards Text Amendment was supposed to protect some parts of neighborhoods. It doesn't appear to be in effect anymore. Planning, we're told, is supposed to be a long-term process. We know that this has been hurried through, and it's a process of let's throw something out there and see what sticks. And now we're going into fallback positions here. It's time to stop the whole ULERP process and say, let's start up with a proper planning procedure. Carl Weisbrod was quoted in the Times a couple of weeks ago as saying, we don't just do zoning, we do planning. And this is proof because we're filling in potholes or we're beautifying this block. And someone else said, well, that's something you should have been doing all along. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Ed. Next, Sandy Rayburn.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak about a slightly different take on this matter. I'm the daughter of a about-to-be 95-year-old woman who was evicted from the Prospect Park residence, an assisted living facility in Brooklyn, Grand Army Plaza. The owner of this assisted living facility is a real estate developer. He bought it on the basis that it would be an investment, and so it was. And what he did in particular was he, for years, had it uncertified, and then when it became more convenient to churn his building, he then applied to the Department of Health, who oversees and certifies and licenses assisted living residences. So assisted living residences that are certified are under the imprimatur of the state, not the city. So why he did this, of course, was because when everybody was forced to sign a Department of Health agreement, which allowed them to remain and supposedly age in place, which is part of the promise from the Department of Health, instead of having to futz around with tenancy laws, New York City tenancy laws, what he did was said, gee, I'm having business reversals. I'm going to have you all have to leave in 90 days. That is law. That is Department of Health, New York State law. We've been working to try to remediate that, but it is lingering in limbo in Albany. And it is never going to go anywhere because it is not in the interest of real estate developers who are also masquerading as assisted living and healthcare facilities to do so. They would much prefer to be able to buy and sell the building, as this particular gentleman, Haisha Deitch, son-in-law of a real estate developer, Shia Boimel-Green, he bought the building in 2006 for $40 million. He sold it to Sugar Hill developers in January 2014 for $76.5 million, even before he announced the eviction to the 123 people, elderly people, including Holocaust victims, among others. So this is really, this business of developing senior housing is a little bit of a myth, because you have to understand that this is not under the imprimatur of New York City. There's litigation going on now in New York Brooklyn Supreme Court, and there's a stalemate because the city can't do anything and the state refuses to do anything. So I didn't come with prepared statement, but I'd like you to take that into consideration on the premise that this is supposedly going to promulgate more senior housing and nursing home availability. Not so, guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Seeing that all members of the public have had the opportunity to speak, that concludes our public hearing on this matter. Now we're going to have City Planning do an abbreviated presentation on both the mandatory inclusionary and the zoning for quality and affordability to address some of the comments and concerns that were raised by members of the Borough Board and of the public.
Thank you. We can just go right in here. I think we'll try and make this brief, but we'll try and touch on as many points as we can that are responsive to the questions and comments that we've heard tonight. I think first I'd like to just acknowledge, and thank everybody for all the attention and patience they have for going through this process and for the comments that you've brought to us tonight. I think one of the things that we are all in agreement about is that there is a serious affordable housing crisis in the city, and that the things that we're here to talk to you about tonight are not in and of themselves the answer to that crisis. They are pieces of a puzzle that are all necessary in order to address the various dimensions of the housing crisis that we have in front of us. And so these are two initiatives under Housing New York, the mayor's housing plan, but they are by no means the only two. They are really two among many. And this slide that we have up here just highlights that there are many categories of activity. These two things are really focused on the creation of more affordable housing, but there are numerous efforts to deal with the threats of housing displacement, pressures on tenants, preservation of existing affordable housing throughout the city, and also neighborhood planning initiatives in specific neighborhoods. One of the things that I'll emphasize here is that these proposals are not, they're different. They are not going to change any of the zoning districts that are on the map today. If your neighborhood is zoned for 1 and 2 family homes, it will remain zoned for 1 and 2 family homes. If it's zoned for medium density contextual development, it will remain zoned for medium density contextual development. This would change certain categories of housing and how they behave, with an eye particularly on two things, well, three things I should say. Mandatory inclusionary housing looks forward at future zoning changes and would apply to those. And zoning for quality and affordability looks at the whole city and looks at ways that the zoning today unintentionally is hurting affordable housing. We'll get to this in a little bit more detail and probably toward the end of the presentation, but zoning for quality and affordability doesn't allow any more floor area for market rate housing. It allows more floor area for certain categories of housing, like affordable senior housing, and allows more height for those types of buildings to fit the affordable senior housing in a desirable building. And there's certain changes associated with the quality of buildings as well. But they're very specific changes, and they are not neighborhood rezonings. There are a number of issues that have been raised tonight about how we should think about planning in individual neighborhoods, and those are important questions. They're just not ones that this set of proposals addresses directly. I'm going to hand off the presentation now to Anna, who's going to run through an abbreviated version of it, and then at the end we can make sure that we've touched on all the key issues.
Thank you, Howard. And I will try to be both informative and concise. I know that folks here probably had a long day, but I'm also going to try to address some of the issues that came up during the questions and comments today. I will talk first about mandatory inclusionary housing. What is it? It's very simply a proposal to require new permanently affordable housing where there is a new zoning established which allows for greater development. So this will not apply today to any particular area. This proposal is to create the tool, to get approval for the tool. We will need to come back to individual communities when this tool is then used in order to take the kind of comprehensive approach, looking at planning in a very holistic way when zoning is changed and when this program would be applied, when the tool would actually be used. It has a couple of pretty important goals. Some of them are very simple in terms of really getting affordable housing built, but some of them really are taking a larger view. We want to make sure that neighborhoods continue to be vibrant and diverse in New York City. We want to ensure that there's affordable housing in areas where there's planning for growth, so that as the city grows, the areas that the city goes to and plans for growth, those areas will be required to also produce significant affordable housing. It's designed to meet the needs of a range of New Yorkers. This is a tool that will need to be used in a whole variety of situations, and so it's designed to be flexible and designed to really represent the minimum of what needs to be done in terms of affordable housing. And finally, the program really needs to be legal. It needs to meet consistent standards for applicability, and it also needs to support the financially feasible creation of housing. If fewer housing units are built in New York City, the affordable housing crisis will get worse, not better. So the affordable housing requirements are, as Howard said, one piece of the puzzle for addressing the crisis of affordability that we have in housing today in the city. So there was a very rigorous financial assessment done of the feasibility of this program. Someone asked whether economists had advised the creation of this proposal, and they did, in fact, advise the creation of this proposal. And this analysis revealed a couple of things that are worth noting. One of them is that there is a trade-off between the amount of affordable housing that is produced and the income level that is reached by that housing. Requiring a greater amount of affordable housing in a new development means that in order to be financially feasible, the income levels that can be reached will be a little bit higher. Lower levels of a share of those buildings can then feasibly reach for those lower incomes. So the program, again, is designed to have a couple of levers for flexibility to allow there to be housing created both for very low-income New Yorkers and for these middle-income New Yorkers, which are also feeling the crunch of finding housing for their families. Another finding is that there are different markets in New York City. Not every neighborhood is the same in terms of the cost of housing and in terms of the way that those economics work. In stronger markets, developments can support a creation of 20 to 30% of affordable housing. Markets that are not quite as strong in the middle, they won't be able to finance that affordable housing without some help from the city in the terms of subsidy or from the state or from the federal government. And then in markets where the housing market is much slower, you really can't achieve affordable housing as part of a development unless the city is giving really direct subsidy to those developments. And finally, this analysis did conclude that a 50% requirement is really not feasible as part of a program which needs to apply to a very broad range of New York City neighborhoods. I mentioned in my remarks earlier that this is designed to be the minimum. On individual sites, particularly where the city is an owner of the property, lots of different deeper goals can be met in the development of affordable housing, and this program is really designed to be the minimum. So this is a really important slide, and I think some of you had probably seen this already in other presentations. This really gets at those affordability levels. On the left side of the slide are the different options that are available for being established when a mandatory inclusionary housing area is created through a neighborhood rezoning. So at the time that that neighborhood rezoning is proposed, one of these options will be selected in conversation with the community. The City Planning Commission and the City Council will have a deciding role in determining which of these options is made available in that new mandatory inclusionary housing area. The options are option 1, where 25% of the housing needs to be affordable to families earning an average of 60% of the area median income. Option 2 is that 30%, a higher proportion, of housing is available to families earning an average of 80% of the area median income. You see that trade-off happening. The 30% requirement requires more affordability in terms of the amount of affordable floor area, but the incomes are a little more flexible. Likewise, option 1 requires that lower level of affordability, and we have to drop a little bit the amount that's required for that development. Either 1 or 2 or both can be established as options for a new MIH area. In addition to one of those options, the workforce option may be made available on top of it. So the workforce option, which requires 30% of the housing to be affordable at an income of 120% of the area median income, can be made available in combination with one of the other options. An important note here, developments that use the workforce option may not take advantage of subsidies for that option. In other words, taxpayer dollars are not going to go to creating the housing units there. They need to be financed by the developer. So those, in short, are the 3 different options for affordability that are proposed as part of this toolkit. Now, on the right of the slide are some illustrative descriptions of what the AMIs mean in real life terms. So we talk about 40% AMI as being a lower income group that we'd like to target. What does that mean? That means for a family of 3, a security guard who makes $31,000 a year, that's an example of what 40% AMI would be. At 60% AMI, we're looking at the income of maybe a paramedic at around $46,000 a year. 80% AMI would be a couple, a school bus driver plus a home health aide would make an income in the neighborhood of $62,000 a year. 100% of AMI is around $77,000 a year. And this would be, for example, a teacher and a retail salesperson. And then that $120,000 level for a family of 3 would be, say, a firefighter and a server. Obviously, many different occupations could come together. People do all kinds of things for a living, but we really wanted to show in concrete terms the types of families that would be eligible for the housing that's built at these levels. So it has a couple of key features we've already touched on. The units are required to be permanently affordable. It applies to developments as well as enlargements and conversions of greater than 10 units in size on the zoning lot. The units may be in the same building, integrated with the other units in the building. They can be off-site within the community district, or they can be within a half mile, potentially outside the community district. For example, if the development is located on the edge of the community district, they would be able to build across the community district boundary as long as it was within that half mile radius. And then some other considerations that we've touched on briefly, a development that has between 11 and 25 units would be able to select a payment in lieu option. This is designed, as Howard described in a little bit more detail earlier, to really allow for the commitment to produce affordable housing to be met by the developer without them directly building that housing. It would provide resources for the preservation and establishment of affordable housing in the area, if not with that specific development. And then finally, there is the BSA special permit process, which is a very specific, narrow option so that property owners could go through a review process to ask that the requirements be modified in order to address a financial hardship. And again, it really bears repeating, the tools that are proposed today are part of a number of important initiatives. None of these initiatives will do the job on their own. They all really need to work together, but they are complex tools. They need to be done right, and we're coming to you now with these 2 tools, which are part of the larger plan. So the process, again, I talked about this a little bit before, is that this proposal would create the MIH program. It's creating the tool. Establishing it in any particular neighborhood would also require full public review, as well as a decision about which affordability level, which option is appropriate for these areas. Going on to the zoning for quality and affordability. Simple goals, simply put, affordability, making it easier to create affordable housing in New York City, making sure the quality of all housing that's built in New York City is high. And the idea is that these are not mutually exclusive goals, that zoning can support and facilitate both of those within a broader program of the city to really look at all of these issues of affordability. So there are a couple of key aspects to the affordability proposals. Help seniors remain in their communities by facilitating the production of affordable senior housing, support the creation of inclusionary housing through the existing inclusionary housing program, which is voluntary, and then freeing up resources to make sure that we're really getting as much affordable housing from the public dollars that are invested in affordable housing as we can. And that means looking at ways to make sure the parking requirements are appropriate, paying attention to the characteristics of neighborhoods and the people that will be living in these apartments. So why does the zoning need to change? We all know that the population is aging. We need to look to the needs of folks as they grow older and make sure that there are appropriate housing options for them. There is a whole spectrum of different kinds of services and ways of providing housing to seniors. Some of them refer in the zoning to programs which are very outdated. And part of what this proposal will do is essentially update those definitions to be consistent with practices now. Furthermore, in medium and high density districts, there is floor area allowed for housing, but the height limits and other controls for the building shape don't actually allow that full amount of affordable housing for seniors to be created. And then finally, in the lower density districts that are multifamily, we talked about this a little bit before as well, the building type is really shaped towards a walk-up small home, but seniors really need to live in affordable buildings. There needs to be an affordable building that has an elevator so that they can actually get to their unit, get away without tackling the stairs. And the zoning needs to reflect the need for buildings with elevators. These buildings are different size and shape than the current regulations allow. So the key elements, again, are to update the regulations to allow for a spectrum of housing types for seniors in New York City. People have different needs for housing.
What has it been reduced to?
There we go. The original proposal that we put out, or I should say, when we put the proposal out for the environmental scoping process, there was a proposal to allow more flexibility for all buildings, regardless of affordability, to have an additional story in the R7A which has a very tight zoning envelope, but that was eliminated in order to focus on really just 5 feet of difference for the ground floor, and everything else conditioned on affordability. So it has to be affordable senior housing or inclusionary housing.
That didn't answer my question.
Sure.
The next to last slide said that you have reduced
Yes.
the amount. So
Right.
can you give it to me in hard numbers?
Yes.
What was proposed and what it is today? That's what I'm asking you.
This number here that says 5 feet was 15.
So you're moving it from 15 to 5, so you're still keeping it at 5.
There were a couple of other districts as well. There were the R8B district and also the R6B district had additional height proposed for certain categories of housing, and that was stripped back to just what you see here in front of you.
Additional questions, John?
Really not a question, it's more of a comment. In all of the demonstrations, and I've never heard anything about schooling, where we're going to put the children to learn, where we're going to put the children for those to have recreation centers. All of this housing is going to produce not only adults, but children. And where are we going to educate them? Our schools are busting at the seams as I'm speaking. So, any plans for schooling and for recreation?
obviously, I'm sure you're familiar with the process that SCA goes through to plan for a school
Very.
capacity. I know a lot of the issues in Community Board 7 and
Extreme.
all the work that the Community Board has gone through to get new schools built in the district in the past. This proposal, because it doesn't generally change densities, the only type of housing for which the floor area changes is affordable senior housing, which, for instance, doesn't generate school children. This proposal doesn't affect that.
I'm not talking about seniors. This,
I know,
this we
understand.
know.
So the idea is that this proposal doesn't affect those densities. Where we are doing neighborhood planning efforts, so in a neighborhood where we're saying we're going to change the zoning, we'd like to work out with the community a plan to change the zoning to allow more housing to be built here than is allowed today. In those areas, we absolutely are working very closely with DOE and the School Construction Authority to deal with school needs as we increase planned densities. But
so just to give you a sense, in District 7, you have a couple of areas on 7th Avenue and on 4th Avenue where you're mapped for voluntary inclusionary housing. The extra height city planning is putting out there, and the fact that where you don't have transit zones for those sections where they may not have a parking requirement may lead to some of the developers choosing to use the voluntary bonus. So you may have a dozen units here that may not have been produced, 20 units there. It's going to be a very insignificant total, but those are sites where, again, largely the change will be getting affordable housing units, but it'll be a handful of units if we get them with this change. The only other change you might see outside of voluntary districts, or obviously a future rezoning action that had mandatory, when the city builds its affordable housing on its sites, because in the transit zone it would not have parking to subsidize, the city dollars might get spent a little more rapidly, so you might have a subtle increase in the pace on the city sites because the dollars get used in a more efficient way in creating units. So it's a very subtle difference.
Question, Jermaine?
I'm sorry, and can you address what's going to happen with mass transit? For example, I am in what might be considered a transit-rich area, but most of our residents have to wait for 4 trains to pass before they can get on a train. So what's the plan, and how are you going to deal with the increased density? And I understand that the affordable housing might not create an increased density, but what we are seeing and experiencing
Is ongoing,
are people
right.
knocking down 3-story buildings and building considerably larger, more dense buildings. So we are seeing an increase in
Right.
density already. So what is the plan
There-
to address it?
There are definitely, obviously, there are definitely transportation planning and transit needs throughout the city that aren't related to the zoning change and increased density, and those are ones that we're on an ongoing basis. The city is working with the MTA to try to address those, and obviously there's been a lot of news about how the city can make better contributions to the MTA's capital planning budget so that the city's priorities get addressed as the MTA spends its capital budget. But that is on a broader scale than this particular proposal.
Any additional questions from members of the Borough Board? I see one question from the public here.
On the whole infrastructure situation, not just schools, but how about the need for additional police, fire, post office, sewer lines and so forth? I've seen on my block, very residential area, where we have a special permit which essentially allows you to create McMansions. It's taxed the services on the blocks, the electric, the sewer lines and everything else. So I can't imagine what kind of pressure will be put on the infrastructure with something like this.
So again, I think that we want to acknowledge the concerns that exist about neighborhood infrastructure issues, and I know that the agencies responsible for each of those pieces of infrastructure hopefully are able to provide you with more specific responses on specific issues. So for instance, on drainage issues, working with DEP on neighborhood sewer planning, what can be done to clean catch basins, or whatever can be done to maximize the availability of local sewer capacity. This particular proposal is not going to drive density changes. It's going to, as I think Richard was describing probably better than I did, it's going to result in the zoning fulfilling its purpose to promote affordable housing more effectively in a kind of diffuse way across the city. if there are zoning changes in a particular area, right, separate from this, but someone comes in, private applicant, or the city comes in with a neighborhood planning process to change the zoning to increase density in the area, we will look at those categories of infrastructure, look at things like sewers, we mentioned school seats, look at transportation, and what can be done to help support growth. And in addition, where we're doing that neighborhood planning work, we've really instituted some new processes to connect with the city's capital budget planning process, so that when we're planning for growth with zoning, we're also planning for growth with the capital budget.
Last question. We got one more question. Mike, you got a question? Okay. Any additional questions? So we're going to consider both of these zoning proposals at our December 1st meeting. December 1st meeting. And at that time, we'll vote on the resolutions concerning both of these proposals. That'll come after each of the individual boards have had a chance to consider the proposals as well. And hopefully the resolution that our office crafts and plans to introduce will account for most of the concerns that are raised across all of the boards to the best extent possible. And at that time, when we consider those resolutions, every board member will have a chance to speak on the proposals, on the resolutions one final time. So with that, we're going to move on to our next agenda item. We've been waiting very, very patiently for us. Our next agenda item is a presentation by the Waterfront Alliance on Waterfront Edge Design Guidelines, a new tool designed to promote better waterfront projects through resilient, accessible, and ecologically beneficial design. Roland Lewis, President of the Waterfront Alliance, will be presenting.
Thank you very much. And my colleague, Michael Porter, will be putting up a presentation, but I can start this. I'll keep this brief at the, can you hear?
Speak it to the mic.
All right. Better? All right. Again, Roland Lewis from the Waterfront Alliance, and I will make the presentation relatively brief. I will end where I'll start where I'll end, which is that the gentleman setting up the presentation right now is Michael Porto, who is actually the person that put this thing together, and is also our Director of Community Outreach and Planning. And what he's been doing over the last few months is going to every community board that will have, I know, the CB1 here in Brooklyn. If you have a Waterfronts Committee or a Parks Committee that wants to hear more about this proposal and this tool, this is an extremely useful tool and an extremely important issue. So the Waterfront Alliance is a 850 member organization. Everyone from the Little Sebago Canoe Club, my club out there in Canarsie, to the Shipping Association, everybody in between who cares about the waterfront, and we work to transform, revitalize, and protect it. We do a number of programs, and very briefly, we are ferry advocates. We get an open orders initiative, which creates docks. We did one out there in Vinnie Gentili's district, and we have one in also in Brooklyn Heights, and others that are being built around the city of New York. We have a thing called Harbor Camp, and you'll be hearing about design guidelines. We have a large event called City of Water Day. Go check us out online, waterfrontalliance.org. Are we okay? Yeah. All right. So that's us. If I'll follow along, many different folks. These are our programs that we just delineated. The idea of this idea of guidelines is there's not much guidance at all to what to build on the waterfront for a park or for a private developer, and we created this program to cure that, to give the best ideas, the best thinking amongst the engineers, the designers. We brought together many folks to do this. Next slide. And the shorthand for this is LEAD for the waterfront. As just like LEAD, it's a voluntary program. Next slide. This is the summary slide. It's an incentive program and a voluntary program. No one forces you to do this, although we've had huge demand to get involved with this program. Developers, all sorts of folks are asking to be certified. It's there's the litany: beneficial, permittable, feasible, and understandable. Beneficial is that little Venn diagram. These are ideas that will make your waterfronts more resilient, more accessible, and promote better ecology. It's permittable. We did this with the governmental agencies to make ideas that are allowed within the regulatory framework. Feasible means affordable, and finally understandable. It's a tool for you. It's a tool for communities. We've had we've had a couple of community boards in Manhattan pass resolutions demanding that all new waterfront developments in their community boards be wedge certified. We don't ask for that, of course, from you, but if you're interested, we're happy to send the resolutions along. It's for the edge. I live in CB14, Alvin's district, but we all depend on the waterfront. So even if you don't have a waterfront district, and there are many in Brooklyn, obviously we have a huge waterfront. We've divided the world up into 3 different categories. There's a scoring one for residential commercial, for parks, and finally for industrial maritime, and there's a huge industrial maritime, especially in Red Hook and Sunset Park in Brooklyn. And then we put together, to make this, we put together, as I said before, a task force of literally hundreds of people, helped us put things together from government, the best brains, the best minds in the professional class, and stakeholders, people who actually own waterfront and govern waterfront put together. This is sort of a picture of what wedge could be. This is Brooklyn Bridge Park, of course, as you know, here, right a half mile from where we sit right now. Also, this slide shows what can be done on a waterfront in this great park. You have a working waterfront, you have an historic boat, you have a resilient waterfront, you have kayaking, and you have a dog on the waterfront. That's a very important thing to have on a waterfront. And again, I can't repeat this enough. This is for you guys. This is for your boards. This is for people. This is a communication. Often when people get a large development proposed for the waterfront, all we could say before was, no, don't put it there, or, oh my God, they're going to do this again. This is a menu of ideas that you can go to a developer or to the City of New York and say, here's a better way to do it, and we hope, we're already seeing it. It's already happening that way. So again, communities can be better stewards of their waterfront, argue for access, ecology, resiliency on your own waterfronts. The professionals and owners are not stupid. They have I think they're finding some of the best practices right at their fingertips. They can get permits faster and easier than they could otherwise. We're actually hearing from government, people are asking from the Army Corps, from the City of New York, have you looked at wedge? Have you looked at this guideline to see what you can do better? And again, these guys are not fools. They want better community relations. They want things done that they want to show what they're doing to the communities. And government agencies, on the other hand, don't want bad applications coming in. They want better applications. And they can promote water. This last one, water-dependent uses, is important to us, particularly at the Waterfront Alliance. All these government agencies say, we want water-dependent uses. We want to use the waterfront. But when you get in there, they're not as friendly as they might be. We have an example from southern Staten Island where a developer came in. They wanted to put a boathouse in, and the government agency said, no, that's very complicated. We have to talk about it. And then the developer, or actually was an architect for the developer, said, isn't that part of the wedge guidelines? Isn't that something you want on the waterfront? Turn the conversation around 180 degrees. They start talking about how they can do that boathouse on the waterfront. Next. We have a bunch of great professionals that have helped us do this. The Waterfront Building Council, I won't talk about it. And we've certified 4, now going on 5 projects. 3 of them happen to be in Brooklyn. One's the Domino Sugar Factory, scored highly, a residential community, as I'm sure you're all aware, out in Williamsburg. The Brooklyn Bridge Park also scored very highly. And down in Sunset Park, the Sims Recycling Plant scored highly, an industrial facility. And finally, over one non-Brooklyn, we had one non-Brooklyn in a Staten Island facility that got wiped out in Sandy, the Sandy Hook pilots. And these are maritime facilities. We want to make this friendly and usable for the maritime industry, which is still active in Brooklyn, as you all know. There are 7 categories. I'll rip through them fast. There's inside you have the scorecard, site selection and planning, basically putting your site outside of the floodplain. It sounds commonsensical now after Sandy, but not everyone's doing it. Access and interact. This is a eco dock. The eco dock in Brooklyn Bridge Park. Access is very important to us. This is on Newtown Creek up in again in Brooklyn. This is also in Brooklyn Bridge Park, where you do seining. All kinds of access is allowable. Edge resiliency, softer edges. that you can do. These are bulkheads that don't have to be the flat. These kind of bulkheads support ecology and maritime wildlife, and soft edges again in many parts, including Jamaica Bay here in Brooklyn. We also give points for materials and resources next down. And then operations and maintenance. So the waterfront's a very hostile environment, as you many know, and we want to know that you're building stuff that will last over time, and also testing it over time. Lots of points if we do that. And the last this blank slide is innovation. We're not so smart that we know what everything. There are good ideas that we've seen from developers that have come in that are worthy of points. And so what we're doing now is outreach and dissemination, like this. We're talking to, again, we will come to your community board, to your meetings, to your committee meetings.
Do any members of the board have any questions?
We've numbed you and to submission. Well, again, I will actually close the zone. The increase in a lot of the housing that's being built, some of it in Williamsburg Greenpoint, is on the water. You see it around the city. I think this is actually dovetails nicely with the presentation before. So thank you very much for your time. Wish you a good night.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, we're almost done. Promise, almost done. I'm going to pass around, great, thank you. 3 resolutions, proposed resolutions. I'm also going to email this to everyone at the conclusion of the meeting. Our next agenda item is introduction of 3 resolutions for consideration by the Borough Board. These resolutions are being proposed by the Borough President's Office and will be considered at the next Borough Board meeting in December. Copies are being distributed right now. The first resolution, the one that Richard's passing out, relates to funding for the long-term care ombudsman program in New York State. You may recall in the spring, we heard a presentation on the long-term care ombudsman program and the lack of funding for long-term care ombudsmen, specifically here across the state, but the impact that it has in Brooklyn. This resolution calls on the state legislature to adequately fund the program. The hope and expectation is that with the board's approval of this resolution, we can then begin an advocacy campaign to our state legislative delegation to lobby for increased funding for this program. The second resolution that will be passed out momentarily relates to legislation currently being considered by the City Council to establish a right to counsel for residents who are facing eviction in housing court. This legislation already has the support of 14 members of the Brooklyn City Council delegation and calls on the City Council to enact this bill. If you remember, last month we heard a presentation from the Right to Counsel Coalition about the obstacles that tenants face in housing court. Most of them, 90% of them, don't have any legal representation when they're facing eviction cases. The third resolution and the final resolution relates to smoke-free residences. Again, last month we heard a presentation from Smoke-Free NYC on the harmful effects of secondhand smoke in residential developments. This resolution calls for developers of new projects as well as landlords of existing housing stock to create or convert residential units into smoke-free housing, as well as calls on the City Council to pursue legislative efforts that would further that goal. So, as has been our practice for the last year and change, we'd like you to take these resolutions back, and again, I'll email these to everyone as well. Discuss them with your board, consider them with your board members, with your constituencies, if you're a council office, and then if you have questions or concerns, we can discuss them throughout the month, and then hopefully pass these resolutions, introduce them formally, and then pass them as amended by the board, of course, at the December meeting. So this way they're official policy statements of our board. Does anyone have any immediate questions about anything that I just handed out or presented at this time? So for the December meeting, the only agenda items will be the zoning proposals, which I imagine will take up the bulk of our time in discussing each of those resolutions, as well as these 3 resolutions as well. So if you have any questions throughout the course of the month on the zoning, you can reach out to me or Richard, of course, Richard being the expert on this more than I am. If you have questions about these resolutions, you know how to reach me at any time. So with that, I'm going to ask, do any members of the Borough Board have any old business to discuss? Sure? Okay. I keep saying that, hoping that maybe sometime, someday, someone's going to say, I want to talk about something. Anyone have any new business to discuss? Okay, our next meeting will be Tuesday, December 1st at 6 p.m. Can I have a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting? Motion. Do we have a second? All in favor? Any opposed? Any? Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Take care.